The Apothecary's Widow, Mary Porter and the Silent Poisonings of Norwich. The year was 1813. You find yourself in the narrow, fog-thickened streets of Norwich, England. Cobblestones clack under the hooves of passing carriages, and the smell of soot, damp wool, and camphor hangs in the air. On the corner of King Street stands a crooked little shop with warped glass windows and a sign above the door, faded by time and weather, Porter's Tonics and Apothecary Services. A place where the desperate came to forget pain, the wealthy came to extend their lives, and the poor came to die quietly. Inside the shop, rows of neatly labeled bottles lined the wooden shelves. Arsenic trioxide, laudanum, belladonna, digitalis, names familiar now only to historians and toxicologists. But in Mary Porter's time, they were part of the household vocabulary. She was not a physician nor a healer, but the widow of a respected apothecary. And after her husband William died suddenly of what the local physician called heart weakness, she took over the shop. This was not common for women in the early 19th century, but Mary was a quiet anomaly. Records show she had no formal training, no apprenticeship, no guild approval. Yet business thrived. Customers spoke of her soft hands, her knowledge of ailments, and her famous bitters, a syrupy tonic of herbs, roots, and alcohol that could fix digestion, cool the nerves, and hush troublesome thoughts. And hush they did. Hushed children, hushed mothers, hushed neighbors who complained of foul smells in the alley behind her shop. What no one dared speak of then, but what trial records decades later would whisper, was the frequency with which those who visited Mary Porter did not live much longer. The widow's clients, her boarders, and even 2 of her assistants perished under mysterious circumstances. But in 1813, no one asked too many questions. Death was ordinary. And Mary, always dressed in black, simply seemed like another grieving figure surviving in a grieving world. At the time, Norwich was grappling with widespread poverty. The textile trade had collapsed, and the poor crowded into unsanitary dwellings near the river. With water often contaminated and food scarce, disease ran unchecked. For many, a dose from the apothecary was preferable to slow death by infection. And so Mary's shop remained open, warm, and full of customers. She kept meticulous records, prescriptions, dates, symptoms, all written in her small spidery hand. Yet what historians would later find peculiar were the margins of those ledgers. Tiny notes, seemingly irrelevant at first. Wife weeping. He won't wake. Bleeding from nose, 3 hours after tea. Good skin color until second dose. Her handwriting revealed no panic, only observation. Then came the death of Samuel Clitheroe, a minor city official known for his short temper and deep pockets. His widow accused Mary Porter of negligence, claiming her husband died only hours after being administered a tonic for chest pain. But without forensic tools or toxicology tests, the death was ruled natural. The coroner simply noted, distressed by work, died at home. But the accusations did something rare. They turned eyes toward the apothecary. In 1814, a pamphlet began circulating anonymously, titled Bitters and Widows, a warning for Norwich. It accused Mary Porter of being a female poisoner and claimed she was behind the deaths of at least 7 individuals, including her own husband. Though dismissed publicly as gossip, it stirred unrest. She was watched. Customers hesitated. Mary responded by inviting a local physician to examine her. Storage methods. She even offered samples of her bitters to local officials. One alderman tried the tonic at a public dinner and reportedly fell asleep halfway through the evening. Nothing more. But the suspicion didn't fade. That same winter, a fire broke out in her apothecary shop. The blaze destroyed many of her records. A local news sheet described it as a tragedy for science and commerce, but the timing was too perfect for some. Mary was seen outside the shop during the fire, calmly watching as flames consumed her livelihood. She was unharmed. After that, she moved from Norwich to Ipswich, quietly selling off the remains of the apothecary and retreating from public life. But what happened next was even stranger. The poisonings didn't stop. In Ipswich, reports of unusual deaths began to accumulate again, mostly among women. And in one particularly odd case, a wealthy man left his entire estate to a woman of excellent advice and cures unnamed, but believed by some to be Mary Porter. The question remains, was Mary a misunderstood herbalist with a talent for relieving suffering in an age of slow death? Or was she a quiet serial killer, exploiting a system that trusted labels more than intentions? And if she was the latter, how many of the dead were truly seeking healing? And how many were simply inconvenient? It was spring of 1815 when Mary Porter reappeared in Ipswich, a coastal market town some 60 miles southeast of Norwich. The journey had not been public. No official documentation records the exact date of her move. But city directories list a new tenant at 47 Curlew Lane, Widow Porter, herbalist. A quiet arrival, a subtle nameplate. Nothing to draw attention. And yet, within months, the whispers resumed. By then, Ipswich was in the grip of a different malaise. Following the Napoleonic Wars, thousands of demobilized soldiers returned to civilian life with little work, fewer prospects, and broken bodies. Infirmaries overflowed. Spirits were low. Many took to spirits of another kind: gin, bitters, tonics, anything to dull the edge of pain and memory. The line between treatment and escape was razor thin. Mary's remedies suited the times, but something else changed with Mary's move. She became more careful, discreet. She no longer advertised. She took clients by referral. And most curiously, she no longer maintained detailed ledgers. What few notes survive from this period are from court transcripts and personal correspondences, preserved in a dusty folder at the Suffolk County Archive, labeled simply, Porter Inquiry, 1817 to 1818. Inside are testimonies. Dry, bureaucratic words. But they tell a story. One comes from a Mrs. Abigail Nunn, age 34, who had consulted Mary for stomach cramps after the death of her infant son. She gave me a bottle of syrup the color of tea, thick and bitter on the tongue. It soothed me, though it made me dreadfully drowsy. After a fortnight, I asked for more. She gave it willingly, with no charge. I found her kindness peculiar, comforting. Yet I began losing weight rapidly. My eyes turned yellow, and then the fever came. Mrs. Nunn survived, narrowly. But 3 other women who sought out Mary for similar complaints did not. These deaths were not grouped together at the time. Inquests were separate, causes vague. Fever, digestive, failure, wasting disease. Physicians blamed poor hygiene or emotional strain. But a pattern began to emerge not among the poor, but the moderately well-off, widowers, minor tradesmen, small-scale merchants. All men with modest assets. And many of them had left small bequests to Mary Porter in their wills, items like silver combs, modest coin purses, and in one case, a set of rare botanical engravings valued at nearly £15. No one noticed these gifts at first, but a young clergyman named Reverend Elliot Carew did. Newly appointed to Ipswich Parish, Carew had taken an interest in local probate records, compiling them for church funding purposes. He began to notice that Mary's name appeared frequently, attached to the estates of the recently deceased. He made inquiries, quiet ones at first. Then he visited Mary himself, claiming to have a recurring cough. What he reported afterward was unsettling. She examined me with her eyes, not her hands. She asked if I lived alone, if I had written my will. When I demurred, she said only, "Best to be prepared. Sickness respects no youth." I took no tonic that day. Soon after, Reverend Carew filed a formal complaint with the Ipswich magistrate. It was dismissed, and within 6 weeks, he was dead. His cause of death? Inflammation of the lungs with sudden cardiac collapse. His assistant, however, preserved his diary. And in one of the final entries, dated 3 days before his death, Caro had written, "If I should pass suddenly, seek the widow on Curlew Lane. Ask her what became of the sailor's wife." No record of a sailor's wife appears in census or burial data for 1815 to 1816, but one police ledger notes a missing woman, Edith Strong, aged 40, last seen walking with a dark-clad woman of middling height, with a black parasol and gloves. The area? Curlew Lane. Strong had been known to suffer from melancholy and was said to be looking for help from the herbal woman. Her body was never found. It was in late 1816 that Mary's fortunes began to change. Traveling chemist named Dr. Jonathan Elridge passed through Ipswich and stayed at a boarding house near the town center. He suffered from migraines and was directed by the landlady no less to consult Mary Porter. Intrigued by the local praise, he did. What happened next appears in a letter he wrote to his colleague in Cambridge. The remedy she gave was herbal, certainly, but its bitterness was unnatural. I retained a portion and brought it with me. Upon chemical analysis, it revealed small traces of antimony and opium, both in quantities sufficient to cause lethargy and long-term damage if consumed regularly. Dr. Elridge sent his findings to the local magistrate. This time, the authorities could not ignore the pattern. An inquiry was opened. Mary was summoned for questioning. She appeared calm, respectful. She denied ever treating Reverend Caro, claimed to have never met Edith Strong, said she had only ever offered comfort to the sick and poor. She even produced several letters of thanks from former clients, some living, some deceased. But then came a final blow. The physician who had examined Samuel Clitheroe back in Norwich, Dr. Horace Beecham, came forward with a forgotten vial. It had been given to him by Clitheroe's widow, who had preserved it in a drawer out of grief and suspicion. Beecham had never tested it. Now he did. Traces of digitalis, foxglove, and most damning arsenic. The trial of Mary Porter began in January 1817. The courtroom was packed. Women wept. Reporters scribbled. Yet Mary sat still, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. The charges were tenuous. Most victims had died years prior. Some bodies had been buried, others cremated. There was little direct evidence, only inference, circumstance, and fear. Her defense lawyer argued that she was being persecuted for her gender and profession, that in a world of ignorant male physicians, Mary had offered relief to those too poor for doctors. And perhaps he was right. After all, how many of her clients had actually asked for death, or at least for silence? Mary Porter was found not guilty. The jury cited insufficient proof. The verdict caused an uproar. Local editorials called it a failure of justice, while others claimed it was a victory for common folk medicine. Mary left Ipswich shortly after. She was seen boarding a carriage south, bound for Brighton. She never returned. Years later, a new herbalist opened a shop in Bath under the name Madame Ainsley. She bore a striking resemblance to Mary Porter, though no proof ever confirmed it. The shop was quiet, the remedies strong, and within 5 years, it too burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances, which leaves us wondering, was Mary Porter ever truly guilty, or merely a convenient scapegoat for a frightened society that feared independent women and unexplainable deaths? And more curiously, how many deaths in 19th century England were quietly chalked up to natural causes when they were, in fact, something far more intentional? By the 1820s, the name Mary Porter had become a kind of whispered legend along the rural routes of southern England. In the dim corners of tea shops, boarding houses, and servants' kitchens, women spoke of her in the same breath as penny dreadful villains and ghost stories. She wore black, always black. They say her tonic could make your dreams last for days. She knew when someone was ready to die, even if they didn't. No formal charges were ever brought against her again. But her story didn't end with the trial or the fire in Bath. It simply shifted into another chapter, one written in shadows, pseudonyms, and unofficial records. One stitched together by rumor, receipts, and the slow, methodical pattern of unexplained misfortune. And one particular trail leads us to 1824. In the seaside town of Margat. It began with the opening of a seaside wellness resort. During the early 19th century, Margat had become one of England's most fashionable health retreats. The sea air, it was believed, cured everything from melancholy to tumors, and the wealthy flooded in, bringing with them their ailments and their gold. Among the many entrepreneurs who arrived to capitalize on this health boom was a woman who called herself Mrs. Matilda Pomeroy. She claimed to have trained in Vienna and Paris and offered curative consultations involving mineral waters, botanical powders, and sleep aids. Her boarding house catered to invalids and widows. And by all accounts, it was quiet, peaceful, efficient. And then, of course, the deaths began again. They weren't dramatic, no screams, no fire, no police investigations. Just a slow trickle of death notices, mostly tucked into the classifieds of local papers. Mr. Thomas Albrighton, late of Cambridge, passed peacefully at the Margat Sea lodging house. A good man, aged 58. Mrs. Lydia Grant, known for her poetry and gentle disposition, expired quietly in the night, comforted by the sea and her nurse. Nearly all were patients of Mrs. Pomeroy. One day, a local physician named Dr. Charles Leach noticed something peculiar while examining one of these bodies post-mortem. The skin was unusually flushed, the pupils dilated. These were symptoms more associated with atropine, derived from belladonna, than with natural death. He wrote to the local magistrate. Once again, the pattern returned. But this time, Mrs. Pomeroy, if she was Mary Porter, was ready. Before any formal search could be conducted, she vanished. A search of the property revealed little, no labeled poisons, no evidence of foul play. But among the ashes in the kitchen hearth, someone found fragments of burned correspondence. Some of the fragments bore a name long vanished from polite society: Mary P. Clitheroe, Norwich, too damaged for legal use, but enough to raise suspicions. One charred envelope had a return address from 1816 Ipswich. Another, somehow older, bore the seal of a Norwich Guild apothecary. And so the legend of Mary Porter grew. The decades rolled on. In the 1830s, another woman, older now, using the name Mrs. Mortimer, was briefly detained in a boarding house in Bristol after two residents fell into a sudden and suspicious stupor. She was released without charge. She left town within the week. In 1837, a burial record from Plymouth lists Pomeroy widow, age estimated 68. No next of kin. No estate. A quiet end, if it was hers, but was it? There are curious echoes of Mary's signature even into the Victorian age. One 1854 ledger from an East London workhouse mentions a woman known only as the widow, offering sleeping draughts in exchange for coins and warm bread. Several deaths followed. No one investigated. And a diary entry from 1858, written by a nurse in Whitechapel, recounts the following: "There's an old woman who comes sometimes. She speaks well, though slow. She knows about herbs more than any doctor I've met, but her touch, it chills the skin. Once she looked at me and said, 'Sometimes quiet is the only mercy left to offer.' I cannot forget that." By then, if Mary had lived, she would have been near 90, still walking, still treating, still whispered about, which leaves the final question: who was Mary Porter, truly? Was she just a skilled herbalist surrounded by tragic coincidence? A misunderstood woman punished for healing outside the male-dominated medical system? Or was she England's most prolific and silent poisoner, never caught, never jailed, and never fully understood? In today's age, forensic science would likely have sealed her fate. Chemical tests, tissue samples, chain of custody, all the tools that the 19th century lacked. But in her time, death came quietly. Death came often. And sometimes death came in a cordial glass of tea mixed with herbs, wrapped in kindness, and delivered by a calm, black-clad widow. There are no statues for Mary Porter. No grave you can visit, only margins and ledgers. An erased address in Ipswich, and a handful of names, long forgotten, that once lined up for bitters and sleep. And so we end with this reflection. How many lives deemed peaceful passings in the historical record were actually part of a pattern no one had the courage or the science to see? And how many Mary Porters walked among us, invisible, precise, and quietly changing the course of history, one patient at a time? The year was 1829. You're standing on Cowgate Street in Edinburgh, long before its gentrification, long before the tourists and café chatter. In this era, it was a dark, damp, and nearly forgotten alley, crouched beneath the grandeur of the Royal Mile and the polished facades of the city's new town. Above ground, gaslight flickers off stately stonework. But down here, underground, the light fades. Beneath your feet is a different world, a layered labyrinth of vaults, cellars, and bricked-in silence. This was where the lower classes lived. Not metaphorically, but literally beneath the rich. It is here the Porters arrived again, quietly. Under new names. Records from the city council mention a Mr. George Pedersen, builder and merchant, taking ownership of a tenement block on Blair Street. But Pedersen was not his real name. Later tax records would connect the signature on his property deeds to a Thomas Porter, cousin, perhaps, or distant nephew of Mary Porter. Unlike Mary, Thomas wasn't an apothecary. He was a stonemason, a builder of walls. And in 1830s Edinburgh, that made him useful in ways most people would rather not think about. Because in this part of the city, the line between architecture and concealment was very thin. The tenement at 12 Blair Street was old, even then. 3 stories above ground, 2 below. A common design in the South Bridge district, where shops operated upstairs and cramped dwellings called backlands stretched behind and beneath. Thomas claimed to be renovating the place. He hired no workers, hauled supplies himself. Locals remembered him as quiet, gaunt, and always covered in mortar dust. It was said he worked only at night. By day, he rented out the upper rooms to lodgers, itinerant dockhands, broken soldiers. A widow or two. By night, muffled hammering echoed through the walls. At the time, the South Bridge vaults had already gained a grim reputation. Built in the late 1700s, the bridge's arches formed a series of connected chambers, used initially for storage, but soon abandoned due to dampness and poor ventilation. The city sealed them off, but poverty finds cracks. And so the poor moved. In illegal whiskey stills, body snatchers, gambling dens, all of it found its place in the vaults. And Thomas Porter found something else. A project. In 1831, a strange complaint was lodged with the Edinburgh police. A young boy named Robert Ferris claimed he'd seen a skeleton in the wall while playing behind 12 Blair Street. He was dismissed. Naturally, children saw many things in the damp dark, but a few months later, that boy disappeared, gone without a trace. His mother, Ellen Ferris, knocked on every door in the street. She even approached Mr. Pedersen, Thomas Porter, but he insisted he hadn't seen the boy. Said he'd been out buying bricks all day. She never believed him. Years later, her name would reappear in a police log. She was committed to the city. Poorhouse, raving about the walls that eat the children. But it wasn't just a child that went missing. In 1832, a priest from St. Giles Cathedral vanished while visiting the Cowgate poor. His body was never found. Weeks later, a group of masons, real masons, discovered a section of Blair Street's cellar wall that had been sealed hastily. Sloppy mortar, uneven bricks. A recent job. They chipped away, expecting a maintenance. Tunnel. They found bones. Officially, they were said to be animal remains. The report, yellowed and cracked in the archives of Edinburgh, makes a vague mention of curious human-like arrangement, likely canine. But the city had no appetite for scandal. Unlicensed burials were common in poor districts. People died. Bodies needed hiding. It wasn't a crime unless someone important noticed, and no one important noticed. Thomas Porter moved out quietly the following winter. His last rent receipts were signed TP, and then nothing. The property stood empty for years, cold and silent. But something lingered beneath. In 1853, a group of university students began exploring the old South Bridge vaults as part of a study on urban decay and ventilation. Among them was a man named Charles Everly, who later became a respected surgeon. He wrote a short paper, never published formally, called Structures of Decay. In it, he described entering the lowest level of the Blair Street property and discovering a hidden stair behind a false wall, leading to a narrow passage. The air was sour. Walls slick with old soot and something else organic. We found what seemed to be a bricked archway that had no purpose. And behind it, a cavity. Filled not with stone, but dust and teeth. The university buried the paper. Said it was sensational, but Everly never forgot it. And before he died, he passed on his notes to the Edinburgh Medical Society. Those notes now rest in Box 37 at the College of Surgeons Library, available only by special request. But there's more. In 1871, during repairs to the Cowgate roadbed, workers found an underground chamber completely walled off, no door, no light, no exit. Inside were 2 rusted lanterns, a pile of child-sized shoes, and a ledger. Only part of it survived, but the signature is clear. Thomas Porter, which raises disturbing possibilities. Was Thomas Porter simply an eccentric mason, unwell, maybe mad? Or was he continuing something older, something darker, hidden in the Porter bloodline? Was it murder? Was it ritual? Or was it survival in a time when the poor were voiceless and the walls never spoke unless chipped open? And most importantly, if there were 2 sealed rooms beneath 12 Blair Street, how many others remain hidden behind brick and silence? It is now the year 1872. You are standing inside the office of Inspector Edmund Wallace of the Edinburgh City Constabulary, a man nearing retirement. Inspector Wallace has seen everything, or so he believes. Pickpockets, murderers, riots, even grave robbers in the old days. But today, he stares at a lantern recovered from a place not listed on any official map. And next to it, a child's shoe, brittle with age. The lantern, rusted and still smelling faintly of coal oil, was pulled from a sealed chamber beneath Blair Street. No entrance, no ladder. The only reason it was discovered was because a section of road had collapsed during heavy rains, revealing a space that should not have been there. Inside, dust, decay, and silence. Inspector Wallace isn't sure what to make of it. But his younger assistant, a university-educated constable named Finch, insists they investigate, because what lies under Blair Street does not match the city's construction plans. The room is too deep. The bricks don't match the municipal specifications of any known period. And strangest of all, several stones are marked with symbols, not letters, not numbers, but something else. Carvings of hands, eyes, and spirals. The symbols appear again in the recovered ledger, written in faint pencil, unsigned except for the initials TP. Some entries are mundane, almost clerical. Bricked 4 feet today. Moisture heavy. Used. Mortar from west side barrel. Lantern needs new wick. Whimpering. Will cease. Then, further down, don't seal until the stillness returns. Inspector Wallace, troubled, sends the artifacts to the University of Edinburgh for analysis. But no conclusions are reached, and again, the official record says little. The chamber is resealed. The street is repaved, but Finch, curious, persistent Finch, can't let it go. He begins to trace the name Thomas Porter through city directories, church registries, and death records. What he finds disturbs him. Between 1828 and 1840, a man by that name signed leases or made purchases in 5 different Scottish cities: Edinburgh, Stirling, Perth, Dundee, and Berwick. Always briefly. Always for properties with basements or cellars. Always moving within 1 or 2 years, and always departing after a reported accident nearby. A child missing. A worker vanishing. A room found inexplicably sealed. The same pattern. And in at least 2 cities, Stirling and Dundee, there are references in local archives to vault rooms that were bricked up after unexplained disturbances. Knocks in the walls. Hollow footsteps. Objects moving. These stories, of course, were dismissed as local folklore, urban legend. But the pattern was there. And so was the name. In 1844, the records go silent. Finch believes Porter died. But no grave has ever been confirmed. Then comes a breakthrough. Buried in the university's archive of building permits. A letter from 1833, signed T. Porter, requesting materials to reinforce the East Corridor and its closure. The property? A townhouse just outside Edinburgh, in Morningside, now used as a boarding school. Finch visits the site. The building, heavily remodeled, shows no immediate signs of concern. But then the caretaker, an old man named Murray, brings out something he found while replacing floorboards: a book. Badly mildewed, but still legible in parts. It appears to be a builder's journal. The front page is dated 1803. 3.1 passage reads, "The new wall hides the eastern shaft. Should no one disturb it again, there will be no need to explain the voices. Cement has quieted them, for now." And below that, a set of initials, TP. The building's current owners deny any request to excavate. But Finch sneaks in one night with a ground-penetrating radar device, on loan from a friend in the engineering department. What it reveals stuns him. A vertical tunnel, nearly 4 meters deep, sealed at both ends. It connects to nothing. At least nothing visible. Finch believes this shaft once connected to the vault system beneath Blair Street. An old escape route? A burial chamber? A ritual site? The answers are unclear, but another discovery just days later sends the inquiry in a new direction. A historian named Olivia Kerr, researching family land transfers in Scotland, stumbles upon an unsigned document dated 1792. It refers to the construction of a substructure to house the remnants and keepings of previous generations. The phrase is odd. Not vaults, not graves, remnants and keepings. It also includes the names of 4 men, all builders by trade. One of them? Hugh Porter, stonecutter, age 38. And in a margin note, smudged and nearly lost, "Let the Porter line keep watch over the dark." Now Finch begins to suspect that what Thomas Porter was doing was not new. It was inherited. The tunnels, the bricked-in rooms, the careful record-keeping. It was part of a system passed down across generations. A family tasked not with building, but with hiding. Hiding what? Finch digs deeper into genealogy. And here, something chilling arises. Between 1750 and 1860, every male porter listed in parish or property records had an occupation connected to stone, brick, or architecture. Not a single exception. Some worked in cities, others in the countryside, but all near underground structures, kilns, basements, vaults. It's not coincidence. It's design. Finch presents his findings to Inspector Wallace, now a month from retirement. The older man listens carefully, sighs, then says, "If you start pulling bricks out of the past, Don't be surprised when something pulls back. And he closes the file. The deeper mystery remains. Were the porters simply a family of masons? Or were they wardens of something older, something sealed, quiet, and buried beneath Scotland's cities? And what of the carved symbols, eyes, hands, spirals found in multiple sealed vaults? Were they warnings, rituals, or something else? And most unsettling, if those sealed chambers weren't meant to hide bodies, what exactly were they meant to keep inside? The year is 1881. You are standing once more on Blair Street, but something has changed. The air is still thick with soot and dampness, but now gas lamps are giving way to electricity. Horse carts share the road with early steam wagons. The city above has moved on. But beneath? Beneath, time does not move, and something is stirring again. At the University of Edinburgh, Professor Malcolm Everley, grandson of the same Charles Everley who explored the vaults in 1853, receives an anonymous package. Inside, a map, a brittle sheet of parchment, and a brass key. There is no note, no return address, just a small marking in the bottom corner of the map: Porter Line, Vault 3. At first, Malcolm believes it's a prank, but he remembers the stories his grandfather told of sealed chambers, of child-sized shoes, of teeth and soot and silent bricks. He visits the College of Surgeons library. The staff brings out Box 37, and there, in the faded notebook, is the phrase again: Vault 3, never unseal without cause. Cement has quieted it, for now. The map leads to a forgotten stairwell off Nidri Street, behind a butcher's shop. Locked for decades, rusted shut. Malcolm finds a locksmith. They open it together. And what they find, the stairwell descends further than expected: 32 steps, curving downward, stone chipping with age. The air smells like wet iron. At the bottom, a narrow corridor leads to a stone door, sealed with a thin layer of mortar and 3 carved markings: a hand, a spiral, and what appears to be an open eye. No hinges, no handle, but the key fits a small slot near the base. The mortar cracks. Inside, silence. Then the first breath of air in over a century. Dust swirls. The room is circular, about 10 feet wide. The walls are lined with shelved stone, not wood, each with small bundles wrapped in linen. Hundreds of them. Malcolm unwraps one. Inside, hair, human hair. Another, bones, tiny, like from a hand or foot. Each bundle is marked with initials. Some include dates: RF 1831, LH 1833, EC 1837. And in the center of the room stands a single stone chair. Atop it, a blank book with yellowed pages. The first entry reads, "The burden passes now to you." What follows is a chilling ledger of responsibility. The book contains entries from at least 5 generations of porters, each assigned a section. They describe movements beneath cities, sudden disappearances, and resurgences. One entry from 1804 refers to a waking sound in Vault 3 and the need to reseal with quiet stone. Another from 1846, the older chambers groan now. Still, they must not be broken. The breathing will stop again. It always does. But most disturbing is an entry from 1792, written in a heavier, older hand. "We do not trap the dead. We do not bury the cursed. We house the remainder, the residue, the stillness." What is the stillness? There is no clear answer. But the entries suggest something beyond disease, beyond madness. Something ancient, trapped in cycles of noise and silence. Something that stirs when disturbed. The porters were not just builders. They were caretakers. Of what? No one dares name it. Malcolm Everley, shaken, reseals the chamber. He publishes nothing. But in private correspondence, found only after his death in 1912, he writes, "I believe the porters did not fear ghosts, nor men, nor rats beneath the streets. What they feared was pressure. A memory stored in walls. A presence not seen but remembered by stone. Edinburgh's built upon layers, and one of those layers watches. The chamber remains sealed to this day. Or so we hope. In 2003, during construction of a new wine bar off South Bridge, workers broke through a wall into a dry circular room. Inside, no lights, no furnishings. But in the center, a stone chair, and on the floor, a brass key. The question lingers like mold on ancient brick. What did the porters bury in Vault 3? Was it simply the guilt of hidden deaths, the residue of poverty, madness, and hunger? Or was it something older, a whisper in the walls, a memory that refuses to fade? And deeper still, what do our cities forget when they bury their past beneath concrete and silence? And who, if anyone, is still keeping watch?